morning, LifePoint. Man, it is so good to see you guys. I'm so glad you're here. 6 people are excited to be here this morning, it sounds like, which is great. Hey, before we get into the message, I'm going to rewind with the hurricane thing, and I get the opportunity to speak at a lot of different churches. It's a ton of fun, and usually average churches, when they see a crisis, they respond. They see a crisis, they respond. So someone like me, someone like Doug, someone like Rusty gets up here and we says, hey, there's a disaster. Could you imagine? We pull on your heartstrings and we say, you should give, you should give, you should get involved. How amazing is it that you're a part of a church that already gave, that already participated, that led the way, that was there in advance, that sent the resources, and because of your consistent generosity was able to make a difference without even asking. Like, that's awesome. That is awesome. Can you applaud yourselves one more time, please? That was pretty weak applause. And so either you're playing it coy or you're humble. And I'm guessing you're just so humble. You're like, no, I can't even cheer for myself, but I'll cheer for you. And I'm so glad we're here. I'm in week 2 of the series, The Way of Jesus, The Way of Jesus. And I don't know about you, I wish the way of Jesus was more clear. I wish it was simple. I wish it was portable. I wish there was just a summary statement that rhymed or was catchy, that we could just say it and we'd all just know, okay, we're on the way of Jesus. But it's just not how it works. And oftentimes those phrases that are just short and quick and simple don't really live up to what we hope they do. The other day, I was driving and I saw a billboard for a local college, and it said, this was so good, it was trying to inspire people. It said, follow your passion and the money will follow. And I'm like, I wish that were true. That is so not true. That is not true at all. There are so many people with theater degrees that don't agree with that statement. They have a lot of student loan debt and no options other than community theater. There's people with a degree in like medieval literature because they love it and no one else does. And so there's just no money in it. And some of you have a passion and you're thinking, I wish I could do my passion all the time, but it doesn't pencil that way. Another phrase that I love that we see oftentimes is the customer's always right. Have you seen that one before? Anyone ever worked with a customer before? And you know the customer's often ill-informed, often strongly opinionated, but rarely right. But we get what it's trying to communicate. We get it. Good hospitality, that's a great thing. Another one I hear this one all the time at weddings usually, and it's usually from a well-meaning and well-intentioned like uncle or father figure. They'll lean in during a toast. We've all heard this, and they'll look at the groom right in the eyes and go, remember, if you want a great marriage, she's always right. And that one always gets less laughs because guys are scared, but we understand women. You're all like, yeah, I mean, that's sage wisdom. That is very, very true. We all know, we understand the philosophy, we understand the principle, but trying to summarize things in a phrase is really complicated. And so in a series like this, I'm tempted, as many of us are, with the Christian faith to summarize it in a phrase, to have one phrase and that's going to cover all of it. But that's just not how it works. It doesn't work that way. I wish I could get up here and say, if you follow Jesus, you'll be too blessed to be stressed. And it sounds cool, but it's naive. It's foolish. I've seen your kids in the lobby. You're going to be stressed. They're awful. I mean, this is crazy. No, come on. I wish it were true. Or ones you see like, it's like on a Hobby Lobby pillow. It would say something like, let go and let God. Isn't that great? Doesn't that just sound nice? Doesn't it sound like something to be cross-stitched? You are looking at me like you have that pillow in your house and now you're offended. Like, it's okay, but it sounds really good, and we tell that to people who are usually, like, you're at your last rope, you're trying to figure things out. It's just let go and let God. And at its core, I get it. It's, you're trying to encourage someone. You're trying to bring hope to a situation that feels hopeless. You're trying to say, you know what, maybe we should trust God with things. And that's true. That is very biblical. But if we take the principle of let go and let God and try to apply that all over our faith, it just doesn't work. I mean, even if you look to the Bible, right, there's stories all over the Bible that don't really track with let go and let God. Like, think of some of the famous ones, like David and Goliath, right? You have a young shepherd boy, David, charged out in front of the army for Israel, and he's set in front of this daunting figure, Goliath, who is this just mighty warrior. He's got his little sling. Could you imagine the story if he sets down his sling and says, let go and let God? And David's dead. I mean, what are you talking about? Let go and let God. Noah in the ark, right? God talks to Noah and he says, hey, I'm going to flood the earth. You should build an ark. And could you imagine if Noah just said, I'm just going to let go and let's see what happens? No, that's not how it works. There's all of these stories that are really messy in the Bible, and there's this balance between trusting God and personal accountability. Like, you actually have to do something. You trust in God for sure, but there's this personal accountability side. And as we continue this series, I was given the topic of, this fancy church word, spiritual formation. So how are we forming our lives to be more like Jesus, to think more like Jesus, to act more like Jesus? How are we doing that? How is formation happening spiritually? And it sounds like an abstract concept that I wish there was a cute little phrase to, but it's not that easy. It's actually pretty complicated to figure out how spiritual formation works in our lives. But I will tell you one thing, and this is going to set the course for where we go today. So whether you're watching online or you're in the room and you're tempted to fall asleep, at least catch this part. This part's important. Here's what I'd tell you. Spiritual formation is not a passive process. That spiritual formation is not a passive process where you lean back and just say, okay, God, form me. Let's figure it out. Oftentimes, we approach our faith a lot like you would floating a river, where you throw the tube in, you jump on, and you say, God, take me where you will. Like, just allow the river to go however it's going to go. But that's not really what our faith is supposed to look like. It's supposed to look different. There's certain levels of participation where it's not as passive as you might think. In church, you hear cute phrases like, I'm the clay and God is the potter. He can shape me however he wants. But that just means that you're just a blob that sits there. And I want more than that for you. And I think God wants more than that for you in your faith than this passive experience. In fact, here's what I believe, that there's a messy area, and if you're taking notes, this is one of your fill-ins, there's a messy area between trusting God and personal accountability. There's a messy area in our faith and all throughout the Bible between trusting God and our personal accountability. It makes me think of a story from well over a decade ago. I was working with high school students as a youth pastor, and one of the highlights of the year was taking kids to summer camp. It was so fun. And if you've never been to a church summer camp, it is high energy, low deodorant. It is high hormone and a lot of craziness and just so much fun to see God move in the next generation, see their passion for it. It is awesome. And so not only would I host a summer camp, but I get the opportunity to speak at a number of different summer camps. And I remember I was speaking for a friend, and it was one of the night sessions, and a service kind of looked like this. And there's a ton of students. I'm sitting right up here in the front. This is so good. I'm sitting right up here in the front, and there's this young guy in his mid-20s leading worship, and he's jumping. Everyone's jumping. The energy, and it was loud as all get out, and I just felt old. And he looks at me, and he makes a universal gesture that I just could not believe could be true. He looks at me and he goes, and 6 of you just understood what that meant. I said, surely he is not about to try and stage dive during this worship set. And he looks at me again and he goes, and I'm thinking, no. I'm trying to remember like T-ball from a kid. Like, how do you wave him to say no? Like, no, don't, no. Don't do that. Like, what are you thinking? He takes 2 steps back, and I realize this is happening. And much like a movie, he jumps into the air. It feels like the world freezes as he's up in the air. I just see his face. Full enthusiasm, 0 personal accountability. Like, just straight up into the air. And I don't know if you've ever been stage dove at, if you've ever had someone stage dive to you, but one thing happens right away, I'll tell you, is you become immediately aware of your surroundings. And I realized that I'm surrounded by what must have been 3rd graders. I mean, they were so little, like combined weighed 14 pounds, and God had wired in them a survival instinct, so they just flee. Like, they're gone. They scatter like mice. And this guy's jumping straight at me, and I realize this is just a me and him thing, you know? This is dirty dancing. I mean, this is just We're doing this. And so he jumps, he's in the air, and I catch this guy, and we fall in, and he is laughing, and I'm broken. And my body, we fall over all these chairs, and everyone's like, no! And he just jumps back up and runs onto the stage. I'm thinking, I have to speak. What are you doing? Like, what went through your mind to think that that was okay? And it's a silly example, and I know it sounds crazy, but listen, I think so often we engage our faith that way, where we look at God and we said, you made this promise, right? And he's like, no, we'll let go and let you. He goes, no, stop, no. And we think that God has a lot of promises with us. And when we follow him, we're thinking, okay, this is his end of the deal. And let me just tell you, if your mantra around your faith has been let go and let God, I can only imagine how disappointed you are, how frustrated you are. Because what happens, listen, when you let go and God doesn't? What happens when you let go and expect God to jump in and he doesn't do what you expected him to do? When he didn't swoop in and save the day? When things didn't work out like you thought they would? And I don't usually like starting messages in this really depressing place. So you're just thinking, like, when's Rusty coming back? This is awful. But I promise we'll get encouraging towards the end. But can I just level set reality? Because sometimes the reality is our friend. Can I just be really honest with you? If you're here and you're making the assumption that God's promises towards your life or that everything's going to go great, if you think that maybe God has promised you perfect, healthy relationships, easy communication in your marriage, if you think God has promised you financial stability and perfect health and a career that only goes up and to the right, if you think that those are promises of God, I'm sorry, but you've been lied to. God never promised you a perfect and easy life. And when we start to bank on promises that God never made, it makes following him really complicated. It makes the way of Jesus something that seems cumbersome and destructive, but let me just tell you, I believe God has something better, because navigating this tension between trusting God, which is incredibly biblical, and personal accountability is hard to do. But if we can get it right, I think we can find a form of spiritual formation that's really practical and that could honestly change your life. And leaning one way or another towards trusting God or personal accountability, well, that comes at different ways and different times. It becomes easier to do. And here's just three things that kind of weigh into this equation. The first one is your natural temperament. Your natural temperament. Some of you are very trusting people. You're incredibly trusting, and we worry about you that you're going to get like catfish and stuff. So it's just maybe you need to crank down your trusting level some if you're on the super trusting side. For some of you, you are not trusting at all. Your life mantra is, if I don't do it, it won't get done, right? I know who I'm talking to. You're the people who are convinced that no one else in your house knows where the vacuum is or how to use it. And so you're just thinking, I have to do it. And you got fed up one time. I know this happened. You got fed up one time. You said, I'm not cleaning the bathroom ever again. I'm going to just wait until someone else does it. And then it like grossed you out. Like you were thinking, my family can live in squalor and they don't even care. It is a petri dish of gross. And so you just rolled up your sleeves. You said, fine, I can never trust anyone. And you just did it all yourself. Come on, temperament really plays a lot into whether or not we're able to be trusting. The next one is this. It's the season of life you're in. Depends on the season of life you're in. For some of you, when things are going really well, it's a natural temptation for all of us. When things are going really well, why do you need to trust God? If things are going well and you're getting good vacations and you're having a good time, everyone's friendly and your family's doing good and your kids are listening to you, I mean, do you really need to trust God? You're thinking to yourself, I'm doing pretty good on my own. But there's the other times in our life that maybe you've experienced like I have, when you tried everything you could and you got to the end of yourself, where maybe you got a diagnosis that you didn't see coming, and you did all the research, and you tried to change your diet, you tried to do everything right, and nothing was changing, and you couldn't figure it out. So what else did you have to do but trust God? Maybe you're in a place with your marriage where you've tried communicating, you tried couples therapy, you tried reading the books, you tried doing all this stuff, but you just cannot get on the same page, and you're both frustrated. And so you come here and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do? But trust God. I don't know what else to do. I'm just going to pray, I guess. And praying doesn't come normal to you, but you tried it. Why? Because the season of your life just led you to that place. And the last one is your personal theology, which is a fancy way of just saying it's the way that you view God. It's your personal theology. And for you and I, that looks very different for a lot of different people. Maybe you were raised in the church, and that's awesome. You had godly parents who weren't perfect, but man, they raised you in the church, they raised you to trust God, and it comes naturally to you. Way to go. I love that for you. But there's some people in this room, when I say trust in God, you're thinking, there's no way. There's no way. If you knew what I've experienced, if you knew the things that took place in my life, if you knew the prayers that I prayed for myself or the person that I love and God didn't answer, then why would you trust Him? And you're so disappointed and you have the walls up and I say trust God and you're thinking, whatever, that's not for me. And listen, I'll just tell you this, if I experienced what you experienced, and if I was taught the way that you were taught, I'd believe the same thing you do. So I'm not here to throw stones. But I'm just inviting you to the idea that maybe each and every one of us can open up our idea of what it looks like to follow God just for the rest of today. Just for the next few minutes we have together, and maybe discover a way, I don't know, to be formed in the image of God. It looks a little bit more biblical. And we'll take it from Jesus. In fact, I'm going to unpack a story today. It's called a parable. A parable is simply a fictitious or made-up story to prove a very real point. And Jesus tells a story. If you've been around church, you've probably heard it. Weirdly enough, if you've never even been around church and the Bible is new to you, you may have heard of this too. You just didn't know it came from the Bible. It's the story of a good Samaritan, the story of a good Samaritan. And it's interesting how it sets up. Jesus is talking to a religious leader, and the religious leader asks him a question that I think all of us would ask. He said, hey, there's a lot of complicated commands in the Bible. If you had to boil it down, Jesus, to the important ones, what would it be? And Jesus flips the question right back at him. He says, what do you think the answer to that question is? And the guy, this is a really good answer. The guy looks at him and says, well, I think you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus was impressed. He goes, that is a really good answer. You just go and do that. And the guy looking for a loophole, the second part, I think the first part he had down pat, but the second part with the love the neighbor bit, he said, well, okay, but can you define neighbor? Because you and I both know some people are downright unlovable, right? You've driven next to them on the freeway. You've been around them. Maybe they're in your family and you're thinking, I don't know how you vote that way. I don't know how you think that way. I don't know what you're thinking. You say the most obnoxious thing. You make it so hard for people to love you. Like those people. And he's thinking, come on, we don't have to actually love those people too, right? The people who are offensive and gross. And he tries to draw a line and find a loophole. It's a lot like when my kids ask if they can have dessert before dinner. Have your kids ever done that? Nobody's kids, just mine? It's unbelievable to me. But they ask if they could have dessert before dinner, and I tell them, no, you have to eat dinner first, and then finding a loophole, they look at me and say, well, how many bites of dinner? And I say, all the bites of dinner. all of them, you just do all of it. And so Jesus, instead of replying with an answer, replies with a story. And here's the story that he gives him. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, about a 10-mile hike, and it was really treacherous terrain, when he was attacked by robbers. Could you believe that? They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and left him on the side of the highway half dead. This guy's having the worst day of his life. And a priest, a high-ranking religious official, happened to be going down the same road. And when Rusty saw the man, he passed by on the other side. How horrible is that? It's just he passed by on the other side. Maybe he's busy. I don't know what's going on. Jesus continues. He says this. So too a Levite, another religious official, when Doug saw him, he saw him on the side of the road and he too passed on the other side. And the audience is thinking, whoa, this guy's having an awful day. He's just beat up and no one will take care of him. And then it turns. He says, but a Samaritan. To us means nothing, but to the crowd, they groaned. His audience that was predominantly of all of Jewish heritage, they were at odds with the Samaritans. They couldn't think less of them. They worshiped in a different way. They thought a different thing about God. They treated their families different. They had different customs and cultures. They were completely at odds with each other. And so when Jesus says a Samaritan, it's the person that you respect least. And he said this, as a Samaritan traveled by, he came to where the man was. When he saw the man, he took pity on him. He knelt down and whispered and said, let go and let God. Could you imagine? Some of you don't know that's not in the Bible. Could you imagine Jesus ends his story with the Samaritan comes over and says, let God, let God. And so from here, send out good vibes into the world and always be positive. Like, what? That's such a forgettable story. Jesus doesn't say that. He leans in. And he took pity on him. The Samaritan, he went to him. He bandaged his wounds. He poured on oil and wine, which sounds painful, but it's medicine at the time. And he put the man on his own donkey. He put him in his own car. He brought him to an inn to take care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is this. That's 2 full days' wages. So if you're in here and you make minimum wage, this is hundreds of dollars. When's the last time you gave hundreds of dollars to a stranger you didn't even like? It's been a long time for me. And so he gave him 2 days' wages to the innkeeper. He said, look after this man. When I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. If he ordered room service, I'll cover it. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to take care of it. After this story, the crowd is disappointed and frustrated and annoyed because there's no loopholes, and it really proves a clear point. To which Jesus says this, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law muttered and frustrated. He said, the one who had mercy on him. He wouldn't even say Samaritan. How do you like that? The one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Jesus uses what in the English language we refer to as imperative verbs when he says go and do, which is a command or call to immediate action. I wish Jesus ended his message with, yeah, I hope you agree. Or I hope you feel encouraged, but don't get too stressed out about it. Like, don't worry about it. It's only if you have margin, and some extra time. I know you're super busy, so don't stress about it too much. I don't want it to be cumbersome to your life. So just if you have time and if you think about it, but mostly it's your heart that counts. So just have good energy, have some good energy in the world and you're going to do just fine. That would be so much easier. It'd be so much easier to follow in the way of Jesus and his good vibes. But he says, go and do likewise. That somehow the formation of the way that we follow Jesus has to do with our actions. John Maxwell is an incredible thinker and leadership writer. He was, interestingly enough, a pastor first, but now has become a multi-time best-selling author. In fact, even if you have nothing to do with church, you've probably heard a lot of his works if you're in leadership, at least his principles. He was really cutting edge in a lot of things that he said. And a theme throughout many of his books is simply this idea. I love this. Focus your time and energy on what only you can do. That you should focus your time and energy on the things that only you can do. It's a really good idea. I mean, if you're a leader, there's a lot of things that could distract you, but there's certain things that only you can do. And in fact, as a pastor, I have a pretty good talk on this idea. I have a pretty good talk for another day. It's essentially like, hey, as a parent, right, to your kids only get one parent. So do the things that only you can do. Be their dad, be their mom, be active. Your spouse ideally only has one other spouse, and it's you. And if not, well, that's a whole different talk, right? But you only get you. You only get each other. So be the best husband. Be the best wife you can be. Do the only things that you can do. And man, it's a good talk. And I'm tempted, if I'm not careful, to take this too literally. And I start to abdicate and delegate the things that don't feel right over the plate for my lane. They don't feel like, hey, that's not for me. God's given me a gift to do these certain things, and other people will take care of the other things. My guess is that the rabbi and the Levite, the Rusty and the Doug of the world in this parable, it's not like they were bored. It's not like they were trying to be mean. They didn't just kick dirt on them as they walked by. It's that they had a lot of things to do. And they thought to themselves, I'm going to do the things that only I can do. And so I'm just going to move on, and somebody else is going to take care of it. And Jesus shakes us from this principle and invites you and invites me to ask this really non-appealing, not attractive, not overly compelling question that's really challenging. It simply says this: when was the last time you chose to do something that anyone can do? When's the last time you chose to do the thing that anyone can do? That doesn't take a special degree or a certain skill set, that anyone can do it, but somebody has to. And my question to myself, and maybe if you're bold enough, a question you could ask yourself is, when the last time I was courageous enough to do that? Every week here at Life Point, I love it. It's like watching National Geographic at the watering hole when you guys get over to the coffee and donuts and everything. I see you guys throwing elbows for fritters, like just trying to do whatever you can do. You're biting people. It's just pure carnage over there. And there's those sweet, godly hospitality people that are fighting the crowds off and kicking them off with trays of donuts and coffee. And you haven't had your coffee yet. You're like, where's the decaf? And I'm like, man, you need full calf. Like, you just calm down. And you're grumpy about it, and they just serve. You want to know what's amazing about that team? Is before they got on that team, no one was like, hey, you have the whole Bible memorized, right? Like, you have it all figured out, and your life is perfect, like nothing's going wrong. Okay, now you can serve. No, anyone can do it, but somebody has to. Somebody's here to say, you know what, I'm going to take my time to make this the most welcoming experience anyone could have when they walk into Life Point. That is awesome. There are people who serve on the parking team. There's people who serve in all different areas. Groups are happening right now, smaller groups than this one. It's so neat to gather together in big rooms, but it's so powerful to meet together in small circles. And there's group leaders who have taken their time, not because they're perfect and not because their house is always clean, because they know the value of knowing somebody's name and knowing what's going on in their life. And so they've decided to lead groups. And they do that. Why? Because anyone could do it. But they've decided it's my responsibility. And that, you want to know, it's not clear and it's kind of clunky. That is spiritual formation. And if it's not direct enough, here's maybe my challenge for you. And again, don't worry, Russ will be back next week, so you don't have to worry about it. But here's what I have to say. Today might be the day to move from good intentions to being intentional. If I can get in your business and just get a little confrontational, today might be the day to move from good intentions, and I just want to be a good person out there in vague terms, to actually being intentional to what your faith could do if you put it into practice. This next passage, honestly, a lot of times I wish it wasn't in the Bible because it's complicated and it's messy and it starts arguments, and I don't like to speak on it because people get fussy and I get emails, so you can just send them to Doug@LifePoint. And I kind of wish it wasn't in there, but James, the brother of Jesus, wrote this. And I think it's just too fitting not to say out loud. And if you have problems with it, take it up with the Bible. Here's what it says in James chapter 2. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye, have a good day, stay warm and eat well. But you don't give that person any food or clothing. Not only are you super condescending, I mean, who would say that? But what good does that do? If that's not direct enough, he twists the knife. Here's what he says. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is, strong words, dead and useless. Ouch. Dead and useless. Unless your faith produces tangible action, unless your faith is held with personal accountability along with trust in God, it's dead and useless. Now, people, if you're smart and you know your Bible, this is where you get up in arms. This is where you get defensive. And I understand. This is where you start to say, hold on. I thought we were saved not by works, but by grace alone. I thought it had nothing to do with this works and all about Jesus. And you would be right. You would nail it. And if the biggest question that you ask about your faith is, how do I get to heaven one day? Then that's the right answer. It's, how do I get to heaven one day? How do I punch my ticket? If that's your biggest concern, totally understand. So glad you asked the question. The only way that we find saving hope is by grace in Jesus Christ, and that alone. The fact that he died and we believe rose 3 days later, conquered the grave, that we might have hope, peace, joy, and grace in our life. That we believe that is 100% true. But James isn't having that argument. James, just bear with me, is probably less concerned in this conversation of how do we experience heaven one day, and more, how do we experience heaven today? How do we start to experience a little bit of heaven, a taste of what heaven could look like one day, here and now, that it's not just a one-day, hopefully thing, that it's a thing that we can take hold of today. That through your actions, through your active and participatory, tangible faith, that you can start to experience heaven here. The last point that I have for you doesn't make sense. And if you've experienced it, you'll agree. And if you haven't, you'll be skeptical. There's no way around it. And I wish there was a clearer way to make it compelling, but maybe you're just going to have to try. Is that there's something happens in you when you aren't doing things for you. There's something that happens in you when you aren't doing things for you. I don't know how else to describe it. And if you've ever tried it, you know what I'm talking about. Man, that junk is addicting. But if you haven't, I don't know where to start. But there is something that happens in you when your life isn't driven by how do I get mine. I'll tell you one story and then I'll be done. I'll rewind you to my wife and I's first anniversary. It was a long time ago. It was our first anniversary, and we had no money. She was in grad school, and I was a middle school pastor, and so we had like 2 nickels in our bank account, and that's it. And I remember we were going to go for like a big dinner for our anniversary, and we went out to this really ritzy spot. It was probably above our means, called Applebee's, and you may have heard of it. Yeah. And we didn't go to normal Applebee's, because let's not get hasty. We went to Applebee's after 9 o'clock, where you can get half off appetizers. Anyone else know that? Yeah, it's God's people right there. And the appetizers, little half off apps, were going to be our dinner that night, but we didn't care. We were young and in love, and it didn't matter. And it was just so nice. We sat in Applebee's, in the dimly lit, strange smelling Applebee's, and we were just so in love. It was awesome. We ordered our appetizers, and we're laughing it up. And my wife has this thing. Well, I'm just going to call it discernment. I don't know a better way to call it. But where she can get it, which like a prompting from God, and then she's actually courageous enough to do something about it. And so she's sitting there. She knew I wasn't going to like what she had to say. And she looks at me over her half-off appetizers and says, "Hey, I just have this feeling that we should tip our server $100. And I'm like, no, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What, you're an idiot. No way. No way. We're going to tip our server $100. There's not a chance. We're at half off Applebee's right now. There's no way. And she goes, she didn't fight. She didn't push. But she kind of kept alluding to it. So we got to the end of the meal. Check came and signed the check. And she goes, "Hey, I just really think we should do it." And I wish I could say that in that moment, I just got so humble, and with a gracious, joyful heart, I said, "Sweetheart, you're so right." And I put down $100 and we kissed. And that's not what happened. I was bitter and I was angry and I thought this was dumb, and I was muttering and I was like, "Stupid $100. Like, are you sure it's the dumbest thing ever? Following God sucks." And so we put $100 down and I signed it. And we walk out of I was so petty, you guys. You have no idea. Walking to the parking lot, I'm not even holding her hand. I'm like kicking rocks. I'm still mad about this whole thing. I wish I could say it went different, but I can't lie to you. And we walk out in the parking lot, and I remember our server busts out the doors. She's holding the receipt. And she looks at us, tears in her eyes. And she says, "Hey, did you guys make a mistake on this?" And I say, "Yeah, I did. Bring it over here. Get the..." Crossed out the 0. Oh, no. My wife looked at her and said, "No, you did an amazing job tonight. We just wanted to let you know how great you are and how grateful we were, because you did a great job." And we like put $100 on a $7 bill, whatever. And she looks at us. I can't make this up. Her name was Shasta. I'll never forget. She looks at us and she says, "Hey, my wedding is in 2 weeks." And I had no idea how I was going to afford a wedding dress. I just wasn't going to have one. And thank you so much. I'm going to go buy a wedding dress with this. And listen, you'd think that would melt my heart of stone. It didn't. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical like you are. And I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, probably would have gotten a wedding dress. Like, I don't think this is going to actually move the needle. And so, listen, I didn't follow up with her. I don't have her number. I don't have this cool story of how we got pictures from her wedding. I don't have any of that. But honestly, I don't care. Because there's something that happens in you when you're not doing it for you. And it took my wife, in her courage and her willingness to deal with my pouty attitude, to push me into a scenario that I didn't want to be in, Start to discover this principle that there's something that happens in you when you're not doing it for you. And I don't know what it's going to take for you, but I would challenge you. What would it be? As I close today, and you want to learn about spiritual formation, I wonder what it would look like to find that balance between trusting God, which is so valuable, and personal accountability where you actually do something with it. So, like Jesus prayed, I'm going to pray that we would go and do likewise. Would you bow your head, close your eyes, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you for stories that capture the moments when Jesus taught, and I believe he taught through your will. And as we look to follow him, Heavenly Father, I just pray right now that we would have the discernment to begin to realize where you're prompting us. God, I pray for every person in the room who struggles to trust God, that right now you would give them strength that they didn't even know they had. God, I pray right now for every person in the room who's struggling to make it personal and do something with it. I pray you would not only give them vision to what it could be, but the courage to actually do something about it. And when we do, maybe we'll discover what it looks like to follow in your ways, to be one of your disciples, to act like you act, to think like you think, to believe like you believe, to have faith like you have faith. In Jesus, we would be called followers of yours. So I pray right now that in your words, we would go and do likewise. In Jesus' name, amen.